Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. We're here with our friend Professor Steve Keen again. How you going, Steve?
Very well, mate. Enjoying my life in Amsterdam.
It looks pretty nice there in the background behind the curtains. So today we're going to have a hopefully a friendly debate about, does Bitcoin actually have any use case and what are its flaws, and can all the problems and the flaws you see in the current economic model be solved with already existing technology? So do you want to explain, in a nutshell, what you see the main flaws of the current economic system as?
Well, fundamentally, it's that we live in a credit-based system where credit is extended by banks that equally, when they give you the credit, they equally give you a debt you have to repay, which means nobody gains any net equity out of borrowing money from a bank, but people believe they do because then they go and buy financial assets, which prices get inflated by the credit, and they think they're geniuses until the growth of credit stops and you fall into a financial crisis, which has been basically the wash and repeat process of capitalism for the last 250 years. And in that situation, we have a whole range of naive theories, the worst being neoclassical economics, which dominates the economic profession, trying to analyse how capitalism functions and getting it all wrong at the very foundations, and therefore having advice about how to manage the system when it gets into a funk, like it did back in 2008, that is also completely misleading. So as well as having a system which has fundamental and irremovable flaws, we have theories about how it functions which have fundamental and irremovable flaws. Great combination.
So in summary then, it's sort of those theories and that you believe if they were to change and we were to adopt a different model in mainstream economics, a lot of the issues would be solved. Is that fair to say?
If there was a new mainstream economics, we could understand how the system worked. We still couldn't get rid of the fundamental flaws. And we can, and I'll talk about that if you like as an opener. But Minsky, the person whose work that I've extended the most time in Minsky, wrote I think one of the most important sentences in the analysis of capitalism when he said that capitalism is inherently flawed. It has flaws which it must have to be a functioning capitalist system, yeah. And those flaws are that it will, in terms of the manifestation of it, it will generate a signal that encourages accelerating investment and provide a means to finance that investment. Now, it says if you want to get rid of it, you've got to remove that capacity, which is what makes capitalism special. So the whole idea of having a flawless economic system, I think, is one of these naive elements of humanity. We were always looking for the perfect world. We're looking for the perfect woman, perfect place, perfect this, perfect that. Sorry, don't exist. Get your head around that. We might design a not perfect system, which nonetheless we understand why it functions and why it occasionally will malfunction.
So just what's your understanding of Bitcoin as it, and just quickly, what do you see the main flaws as then, Steve?
Okay, well, I'm not a Bitcoin expert. I am a money expert, so I'm coming at it from the money point of view, and I know I'm going to get things wrong about Bitcoin because I don't understand it properly, yeah. Fully being not a technician in it nor a believer in it. Yeah. But what I see Bitcoin as being, and it took me a long time to get my head around, why this emphasis on the blockchain and the distributed ledger and so on, it was solving a problem that you couldn't trust the bank's ledgers. Can I use an Australian expression here? That's 99.9% of the time bullshit. You can trust the bank ledgers. They do an extremely good job of keeping records of who's got what amount of money in their accounts and what transfers exist, and they ring you up and cut you for fraud all the time. I get too many checks about fraud. Sometimes valid. There was a time somebody tried to buy an airline ticket to Latin America from my bank account in Manchester when I was walking down the street of Oxford, London. Yeah. Oxford Street, London, so they genuinely do it properly. 90% of the time they think something fraud happens actually genuine, and I go stressing process trying to confirm, yes, I did make that transaction. Yeah. Okay. What you can't trust banks for, which is a real problem, banks create too much money to finance credit asset bubbles. Now, rather than doing something about that, I think Bitcoin actually makes that problem worse because, in a sense, Bitcoin is trying to create yet another form of money. It also tied itself into believing that money was gold, is gold, etc., etc., sort of gold bug stuff. So it tried to emulate gold by having a fixed supply of it and only the price can change, et cetera, et cetera. The supply slowly rising over time to 21 million, but the price per unit dropping. It added in an element which made itself its own speculative commodity, because you can buy 1 Bitcoin, 1/10 of a Bitcoin, 1/32 of a Bitcoin. What is the minimum amount of Bitcoin you can buy? It's 110 trillion, isn't it, or something crazy like that?
At the moment, it's 8 decimal places. Yeah, 1 Satoshi.
8 decimal places. Okay. Well, that means somebody with $100 10 years ago could have bought 100 Bitcoin, and now the person with $100 today can buy some tiny fraction of a Bitcoin. It still provides a means by the fiat money purchase to inflate the value of the price of the asset. Yep. And in that sense, it's a perfect speculative vehicle. Now, one thing capitalism doesn't need is more means to speculate.
Yep.
One thing it doesn't need is yet more forms of money. We need to work out the one we've got. And what you get out of Bitcoin as well is a proliferation. It's an ecosystem. It isn't just a single form of money. There are multitudes of different clones and varieties of Bitcoin.
Yes.
And one of the appeals of genuine money is simplicity. You go down to the shop, you pay with a currency which is related to your particular national location. You don't go into the shop, look at the prices, decide which of the 57 currencies on offer you intend buying, and then fart with that particular can of beans. So these are the issues about the nature of money versus the nature of Bitcoin that I think Bitcoin got wrong, and has inherently got wrong and really can't fix.
So just for simplicity for this debate, we'll try and keep it as just Bitcoin, because, I mean, the other argument is there's, 100 countries, we can have 100 currencies. Maybe in the future you can pay with Chinese yuan at the local supermarket or something like that. But just for the point of this debate, let's say that Bitcoin is the only currency for the economic side of things that we're going to debate. So the first thing you brought up was about trust, and I think nobody doubts that the bank's ledgers are correct, but they're behind closed doors. So with the financial crisis, what Bitcoin brings is transparency, so we can prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that something is solvent or not solvent. So would you agree with that it's maybe, the centralized point is actually a target and another weakness? So if Commonwealth Bank only have a certain amount of servers and backups, if all those get wiped... You made one point. Go back and repeat it, because I hate this thing where you get 5 different points, and please answer 1 to 5 in sequence. Cool. Okay.
Back to point 1.
So first point was... about transparency, I think, was it? So the fact that, I agree with you. The bank's ledgers are probably right, but what if that bank's insolvent and holding all this bad debt, and nobody knows?
No, that's got nothing to do with it. That's nothing to do with it. Sorry. This isn't whether you can trust the ledger, it's whether you trust the prices that are associated with the assets that are on the ledger. Okay. Yeah. Now, let's go back to the financial crisis, and I've forgotten which particular financial fraud it was, but it was either Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, or one of them. And I think it was Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, I think it was, got in touch with their good friend. I'm getting my names here. He was Treasury Secretary, author of On the Brink. Hank Paulson got in touch with Hank and said to Hank, "Look, you've got to do something. We're about to go bankrupt." And Hank asked them, "How long have you got?" And the answer was about 3 hours. Okay. Now, why would they have about 3 hours before they're going to go bankrupt? Because a bank, and this is one of the fundamental flaws of capitalism I want to discuss as well, a bank has to have positive equity. If you subtract the value of its liabilities from the value of its assets, you must get a positive value. Those assets include our bank accounts, and that's the sort of stuff which Bitcoin is targeting. Don't have your money in a bank account, have it in Bitcoin. Okay? That's not the weakness. The weakness is also in the bank's asset list. There are the price, the product of the price of currently listed financial assets, such as shares, bonds, et cetera, times the quantity the bank holds. Now, when you have a financial crisis, as we had back in 2008, you've got a plunging share market multiplied by a fixed number of shares the bank has got, which they might be trying to sell and turn it to cash at the same time. But let's imagine they're hanging onto those shares. As the price plunges, the value of their assets fall, the value of the liabilities remain constant. When they hit the negative number, they are bankrupt. Yeah. So the problem is not whether you can trust the bank's recording of your bank account and my bank account. That doesn't change unless we withdraw money from it. That's because you're a bank run. Okay. But we weren't talking about a bank run on Goldman Sachs because it wasn't a bank. It didn't have personal deposits. Okay. So the deposits were, in that sense, not even part of the question, let alone being safe to begin with, because the banks do accurately record that, and they don't take money out of your deposit account when they start getting in trouble, because then they quite legitimately have police turning up to arrest the bank manager. The problem is the plunging value of assets during a financial crisis. And the reason the asset prices plunged is because the money that banks have lent to finance people buying those assets has inflated the asset prices, which we've seen as well. Okay. So your weakness is you can't trust the value of the asset markets, the financial markets prices of assets. And that's got nothing to do with whether we're using a blockchain or a distributed ledger.
Cool. So that's probably the first point that I want to talk about. And so that's a good counter argument. In this case, being provably fair or solvent doesn't really matter if it's the price of the assets.
Got bugger all to do with it.
Okay, cool. I like that one. So the next one is, and probably one of the biggest points, is the fact that it's decentralized. And that means censorship resistant. So if you live in Russia and you're a young entrepreneur, you're doing your thing on Patreon, and I'm in Australia and I really like your work, and this gets into a few other points, but I'll try and keep it one at a time. As you said, there's no banks, no governments, no countries, no borders. I can send you $1 a month or $10 a month and support your work. Now, at the moment, it is currently impossible to send low amounts, an international transfer fee somewhere between $20 and $50, and the exchange rates, blah, blah, blah. So do you believe that is a great benefit? It reduces that friction between borders? And
No, because I've got a Payoneer account, I've got a PayPal account, and Payoneer fees are quite low. PayPal fees are quite low. TransferWise does an extremely good job of low-cost transfers for fees between one bank. There are other solutions that you don't need to invent the entire Bitcoin global system to enable that to happen already. And in fact, on that front, given the cost of a Bitcoin transaction, the whole 10-minute thing and the amount of energy involved, it's far cheaper for me to use TransferWise to do those transfers than using Bitcoin, and cheaper for the planet as well.
So I think PayPal just put a $6 international transfer fee as part of their terms and conditions. So if I want to support you with $6 a month, that's no longer feasible. Would that be a good sort of counter?
But you go straight for your bank account. You go straight for your bank account. You pay me from your bank account. So if you look at it with Patreon right now, Patreon takes payments directly from your bank account. You pay whatever local bank fees you face. They're quite relatively trivial. They're about 5% of the money you pay across, so 1 in 20. So if you're talking about $1, it's 5 cents. The problem is with Patreon on that front, I know it very well, of course, is that they also whack on VAT for the particular country you're in. Now, and actually, rather than what I prefer PayPal and Patreon to do, I've told them this. If you pay me $1, I'd like them to take out the 5-cent bank fee from the amount of money that I get, and take out the VAT from the amount of money that I get as well. So rather than me getting $1, I get 75 cents, you'd be paying $1. You would include those fees. They do it in a different way, but that's their own internal choice.
So what about?
But nonetheless, the fees are quite small,
okay.
and it isn't the transfer cost. I get the transfer cost when I take the money out of PayPal, and there I'm paying $6, let's say, to withdraw the 6,000 or more that I'm getting from my. I can handle that's 0.1% of my revenues, and I'm paying 5% overall. I'm paying 5% fees to Patreon and 5% to PayPal and that sort of stuff out of the amount of money I'm getting aggregated. I'm cool with that.
Cool. Okay. What about in terms of censorship? What about countries that have capital controls? If I live in Greece, they now tell me that I can only get $100 out of an ATM a week, or if I live in China, they say you cannot take more than $10,000 out of our country per month. If I want to move money around, I can do it instantly on my phone. So again, speed is another thing I haven't mentioned yet, but between countries, between banks, censorship resistance, is that at all of interest? Or
It's of some interest, and certainly the situation with Cyprus is an absolute disaster, but that's because the morons who run they're not morons, they're intelligent people who taught a moronic theory. The people who run the European Central Bank thought it was a good idea to do that. And of course, at the same time, as I realised later, they're having a shot at Russia, because a large part of the money in Cyprus bank accounts was actually Russian money, where they're trying to launder out of their problems with Putin back in, and the oligarchs back in Russia. So there are issues at that scale, but if you try to use Bitcoin for that on anything like a grand scale, guess who's going to come after you? The same institutions. The governments will block you, and they will be able to do that at some point.
What do you mean? So yesterday we had someone send $1 million of Bitcoin from one country to another. What do you mean by they will step in and block you?
you're using internet systems which are nationally based, and they can't not be nationally based. The governments have some capacity to control that. If they see Bitcoin as a big enough threat, they'll block it.
They can't.
I don't think you can get.
They can't. They cannot block that. They would have to block the whole internet. As long as I have internet access to the internet, I can use Bitcoin. So
yeah, well, in that sense, it's a minor service of some relevance to people in politically suppressed regions of the world.
Okay, yeah.
That is not the basis on which to use your financial system for the entire planet.
Sweet, cool.
So
we can move on. We can move on. I've just got about 5 points I think I'd be great to talk about. So, anonymous, if WikiLeaks recently had all their banks frozen, no banks would deal with them, or let's say that Professor Steve Keen becomes such a prominent voice in this space that becomes a threat to the current theory, and they say, we're shutting down all your bank accounts. We don't want you to be financed with what you're doing. What if everyone around the world can now send you Bitcoin? It can't be stopped. Again,
feasible, but why should it cost the amount of energy that it costs to do it? It comes back to the other issues. Yep. There are ways in which that's a useful thing to do, but I don't think it's useful to do it in such a way that it may be a good idea to shut you down because you're destroying the ecosphere.
Cool. So we'll move on to energy debate and that sort of things. That was another point I had. So Bitcoin does use a lot of energy. I would argue in counter arguments that there's lots of, if we got rid of all the banks entirely, they use a lot of servers and a lot of energy. Instagram and Facebook use a tremendous amount of servers and energy for us to put up photos of each other. So I think there's kind of a big argument there about, well, is it technology uses a lot of energy and servers? But another counter argument is that renewable energy is growing. You can now build a solar farm or a wind farm and put a Bitcoin mine at the bottom of it, and it'll pay itself off with Bitcoin mining fees. So you're actually encouraging.
At the moment, they will. I mean, I simply can't see that being supported when Bitcoin is just transaction-based rather than mining-based. This is the other. And again, I don't know enough about the technology, but from what I can tell, when it comes down to the transaction fees, to be able to make Bitcoin a sustainable alternative to national currency for transactions, when transactions are all you're getting money out of rather than continuing to mine the Bitcoin, then I don't think the transactions, given the energy cost that's involved, I don't think transactions are going to be profitable. And that's my...
currently, I was just going to say quickly, currently the Bitcoin inflation rate is 4%, and that halves every 4 years. So that 4% inflation, the miners that do the transactions, they get that as a reward, and they get the...
4% of 21 million?
4% of 21 million over the remaining 21 million, and every 4 years that halves, so it tapers off, and they collect the transaction fees as well.
Yeah. Well, see, as you're heading towards that ceiling where there are no more transactions, with no more Bitcoins to mine, or a trivial level left to mine, the transaction fees, I can't see those transaction fees being anywhere near as high as the energy costs involved, given the 10-minute limits and so on, and the algorithm solving, which means it's not going to be economic to use it for transactions. Now, unless you can use it for transactions, it's not money.
With the free market decided and all energy farms went to places that are renewable, hydro, solar, wind, is that feasible?
Do you know how much energy you're talking about there? I mean, and we are facing this. This is if there's any people out there that believe global warming is a myth, bugger off, because I think I know enough about science and scientists, and I know a lot of people work in the area. If you think it's a myth, go watch somebody else's podcast. It's not a myth, it's really happening. And it could be absolutely critical in the next 10 to 30 years on this planet. Certainly in the next 50 years at current consumption rates, we're going to hit a brick wall where one of the most important elements will be energy rationing.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to avoid that, forget about solar flow, forget about solar power. Because again, people don't know what is called energy return and energy invested.
Yeah.
At the moment, I've seen all sorts of speculations about the energy return and energy invested in solar. It's certainly getting better than 5 to 1 to 7 to 1, which is an absolute critical level for the sustainability of human civilization. I can think it may be about, given how it's calculated, there's all sorts of people who don't know what EROI, the idea is you say, from the very first point where you start manufacturing an energy mining system, which all systems are energy mining. We can't create energy, we mine what is currently there. From the beginning to retiring that, then you say, what is the amount of energy you got back versus the amount of energy you had to put into build the mining rig, and that says the mining rig and mining energy here. A lot of the calculations include decommissioning. We have never decommissioned a coal mine. We bury it. We don't fix it up. So I think those calculations they're dodgy, but nonetheless, they're still implying that the amount of solar power we'd need to install to replace the current level of human consumption for the sake of staying alive, let alone financing Bitcoin transactions, is so ginormous that if we switched off the coal power because we simply had to, the amount of time it would take us to get to the stage where the solar would take over is measured in a period of decades.
Yeah.
The amount of construction work that would be necessary.
Okay.
The fastest way to get that energy is not solar power on top of your Bitcoin rig; it's a nuclear power station.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I've become. Having come from a green background, I've had plenty of engineers persuading me over time that the fastest way to get the energy up at the lowest level of pollution is nuclear power, including uranium, but also thorium systems.
Yeah, I agree. I think
that is just we're in a different planet. We need to be on a different planet for Bitcoin to be feasible in that environment.
Okay, so I think we can probably agree that power consumption is a big issue. Maybe I think that there are ways to solve it. So we might differ on that one a little bit. So the next point I had was a speed. So if I want to send money to a different country, depending on which country, it can take weeks to get that money. Now, we live in a digital instant world where we're having a conversation on a different side of the planet in high definition. Why does money need to be so slow if it can be so fast?
Doesn't Bitcoin have a 10-minute limit?
10 minutes confirmation. So yeah, Bitcoin transaction.
Okay. How about I buy a cup of coffee? I'm not going to wait 10 minutes for that to be confirmed.
So as the technology progresses, there are ways for merchants to accept it with zero confirmations and prevent chargebacks. So the more confirmations,
then you've got the trust issue being over. You've got to have a system which is, the trustless idea of Bitcoin has to have a trustful component to make that 10 minutes work.
You get into the debate about, is a $4 cup of coffee worth that person going and trying to cheat the system? Obviously, if it was $1 million, then you would wait for multiple confirmations. So that is definitely one argument. And Bitcoin is working on second layer solutions. So off the main Bitcoin network, there will be ways that it's already out, that's already rolled out to pay instantly. Lightning network.
They're called Lightning?
Yeah.
Okay. I've still yet to see that functioning.
Yeah.
To me, again, what we're trying to do is get around the fundamental design flaws in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay. Basing it on gold when money was never gold. Money's always been based on trust. The amount of energy being consumed being such that we simply can't allow it to continue unless we drastically reduce the energy levels, but the energy needs are built into the system via the algorithms and so on.
Yes.
So you're trying to make a flawed system work. Now, you may get there, but you're also using fixing up flaws in a fundamentally flawed design to address problems that weren't actually major problems. To me, there are... people who try to apply Bitcoin as a clean solution to the world's problems haven't looked at what they actually are properly.
Yeah.
So you may get there, but it's going to be a struggle, and you may well find you're beaten in terms of digital transactions by central banks rolling out their own blockchain technology, centralized ledger, much lower cost. People having transaction accounts which aren't affected by banks, but you're trying to get away from the government. And this is one of the problems. I want to talk about that in a bit of detail.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've probably got like 2 points left, and then we can maybe talk about how it all fits together. Immutability, credit card fraud and chargebacks are a huge issue. If I send you money, or whatever the case is, the fact that it could erase all those chargebacks and, once you send money to someone, it's there. There's no way to change that. Is that at all...
Not a major issue. I mean, it doesn't happen particularly frequently. It's people blow this relatively trivial event up to being a major issue. That's not what caused the financial crisis. That's not what causes capitalism to have crises on a regular basis. It's a minor functional issue, which is maybe of some value, but it isn't worth building an entire system to address it.
Fixed supply and no way to counterfeit. We've talked about
bullshit. Sorry, you finished the question. I was just going to
say we touched on the decreasing inflation rate, but there's no way for anyone to copy Bitcoin. That was the problem of digital money that it solved. So what don't you like about the fixed
problems? Money is something which should be growing over time. If you do have an economy which is growing over time, then that is fundamentally, in the history of capitalism, been driven by an increasing money supply, not by a rising velocity of existing money.
Okay.
And Bitcoin, of course, is not a rising velocity of money; it's a rising price of the actual unit, which is supposed to make up for those other problems. I don't believe it will. It's the issue of debt-based money and credit-based money. Those are important issues. Yeah. And I think Bitcoin is orthogonal to those issues rather than solving the problems they have.
Okay, so you'll believe that there needs to be some sort of inflation rate in line with growth of the economy and that sort of thing, rather than a
and that's been
supply.
The quantity has risen over time rather than the price rising over time. Now, Bitcoin is trying to say, let's make the price rise over time, and that means the quantity doesn't have to change. And that's sort of the gold philosophy as well.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people get into this because they say, look, we believe real inflation is tracking a lot higher than stated inflation, and we believe that wealth inequality is growing. Our wages aren't growing, yet governments are, or banks are printing more money and maybe giving it to the banks and the stock market, and certain assets are getting that money trapped in them. Whereas a lot of people are saying, well, we don't want to be part of that money system. We are in control of Bitcoin.
Well, see, that's look at the level of inequality that Bitcoin already has, because I think most of the Bitcoins are owned by miners in Mongolia, isn't it? I mean, if you do a Gini coefficient on Bitcoin ownership, I think you'd find something just about as unequal as the global distribution of money and wealth. And again, this has got nothing to do with the nature of the money. It's got to do with the nature of social relations. Workers are getting screwed now because neoliberal economic policies driven by neoclassical economic theory have eliminated trade unions and believe that it'd lead to a better world. Now they're complaining, oh dear, wages aren't rising fast enough. What on earth has happened? Has the Phillips curve disappeared? Bullshit. You guys have destroyed the trade union movement. You have a two-sided bargain between workers and employers. In the past, it used to be a two-sided battle between trade unions and managements, either big firms or collations of managerial groups. Now it's tiny bloody workers who say, Jesus, if I ask for a job rise, he's going to sack me. So you put up with shit wages until such time as capitalists are clamouring for work, at which point they're going to be offering high wages to everybody, including their current employees, to stop them walking out the door and going from a shit job in Amazon to a shit job with Google. Not Google, but let's use another minor supplier. So what we're going to get is spikes in inflation. The wages will not rise, then they're going to burst up. It's exactly actually replicating my own mathematical models of financial instability, because that's what drives my models. Workers demanding wage rises when you get very, very tight employment. So what Bitcoin is giving you is a tangential solution to that problem. What you should be doing, rather than getting a trustless financial system and trying to replace the monetary system, you should be trying to organise workers, organise non-owners of capital to get some bargaining power against the owners of capital.
Do you believe that with the current financial system, we're seeing more wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, versus if Bitcoin was to continue to disperse more evenly, that would fall in its favour, as you're saying about that? Or not?
But it doesn't. Okay, Bitcoin is just as unevenly distributed as not just as, but extremely unevenly distributed, and there's nothing in the design to prevent that happening.
Yeah.
If you had a gazillion concept behind it, so the monetary system was tried in Austrian towns during the Great Depression, where the money depreciated over time, then you would stop the aggregation. But I don't think for a second anybody involved in Bitcoin would want that to happen.
Yeah. Finally, I was just going to say there's a couple more. Divisibility and fungibility we've spoken about a lot. The fact that I can maybe send 10 cents to a charity in Africa and we know it goes straight there, all those sort of things. Is that any benefit for microtransactions and that sort of thing?
I don't know that Bitcoin works for microtransactions. I have seen the absence of microtransactions is a major problem with the financial system. That's one of the major reasons why journalism has been destroyed, because media companies used to rely upon you buying a physical copy of the Sydney Morning Herald or whatever else, and now are making money out of the ads. You were the product. You were being sold to the advertiser. Now that's been destroyed, and that's a large part of why media has become so bad in the last 5 or 10 or 15 years. But I don't see how Bitcoin solves the micropayments issue because of the costs involved in each transaction. And
so Lightning Network will have next to zero fees, like fractions of a cent. So that's something that we can maybe agree that in the future content creators and micropayments.
If that works, then that would be good. Yeah. That would be good, because micropayments are a major issue. and we still haven't solved that particular problem. But I'm not sure that Bitcoin through. See, if Bitcoin works at that level, somebody else may work at a much with an entirely virgin network might come along and offer an even cheaper version than Bitcoin, because you're still fitting within the limitations of the block size, chain size, and so on, and verifiable transactions and that sort of thing. If central banks come along,
that's probably where we get into those other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So does banking need a facelift in general? I mean, other than ATMs?
Oh, it's a transplant.
Yeah. So we can agree on that.
Get a facelift.
Other than ATMs, they haven't changed much in decades.
No. Well, they've changed in terms of you can do electronic transactions, use them. But the basic problem is banking is, what a bank is the right to create money and to match it with the creation of an equal amount of debt at the same time. So you, by giving somebody money as a bank, credit, you also get a lien on their income earning capacity for the future. Here's $1 million. By the way, you owe us $1 million. Okay. Now that causes the asset bubbles we've seen, and causes the financial crises that we've seen. And the money that they give, they only give them when it's backed by collateral. I've got a personal example now, which I'm happy to throw your way.
Yeah.
One of my sisters wanted to start a business on some land she had. She couldn't get a bank loan for it, so I gave her the loan. The business will open up shortly. At some point, the bank will then give her a loan based on the collateral that the property now represents. I'll get paid back. The money creation only occurred after the asset existed that the bank could put a lien against, rather than funding entrepreneurs as the mythical view of banking is. They only fund against collateral and therefore cause asset bubbles. So we have to address that. Those are one of them, and that's why I say, well, there's a heart transplant. It's almost a brain transplant.
Yeah.
That they need, not a facelift. Bitcoin to me is a facelift.
Okay, cool. Any other final thoughts, Steve? Like all those little points tied together, if the banks refuse to change their method, do you think that this is possibly a social movement and saying, well, you're not changing anything. This is our attempt to change. Even if it is energy efficient, whatever it is, we're going to continue to make it as good as we can and make our own system.
Yeah, well, that's a potential way to see it. But Bitcoin has then been based on the gold bug view of money and so on, the energy consumption issues, the time delays and so on, trying to avoid trust when what we need is a system we can trust, rather than banks exploiting trust, which is what banks do right now. Those are all issues which I can see a valid reason, but I think Bitcoin was the wrong manifestation of those. And it come back to the point I wanted to finish on about the nature of one of the fundamental flaws in capitalism. When I say that banks have to have positive equity, assets minus liabilities, banks must be positive. When you have a totally private system, which is what I think a lot of Bitcoin people are rather Austrian and gold bug in their thinking, they want to have totally private, get rid of government completely. If you're looking at just the financial side of things, forget about the fact that you've got a couple of nice stuffed toys in the background there, and we can all have plenty and collect stuffed toys. And your collection of stuffed toys doesn't inhibit my collection of stuffed toys, which, by the way, I have none. When you look at financial assets, if the assets minus liabilities equal equity equation applies to everybody. If you have a 100% private system and the banks have to maintain positive equity, that means, by definition, the rest of society has negative equity. Okay? Now, if the rest of the world is trying to achieve positive equity, that is one of those fundamental constructions. Yes. The only way we can, as a part of society, not all, can achieve positive equity is as another part of society, not all, maintains negative equity. Now, banks can't do negative equity. You and I can sustain negative equity, but we're trying to achieve positive. The one institution that can maintain negative equity is the government. Because when the government gives you money, it doesn't come attached with the debt at the same time. Yeah. They've given you an asset which you can save. You can get a net positive equity position so long as the government has net negative equity position. Now, that's what's called government debt. Yeah. Okay? It's misclassified. But if they don't maintain negative net equity, we have negative net against the banking sector. Yeah. And ultimately, that leads to financial crises and collapse. So we have to accept that if you want to have positive net equity for everybody who is not a bank, then you have to have another institution which maintains negative net equity, which we call government. Yeah. And if the gold bugs and we could accept that, there's a role for government.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a lot of people in this space that are down with everyone, but I think even for Bitcoin to succeed or whatever it is, we still are going to need banks in some capacity. Maybe one cryptocurrency can
and government as well. Yeah,
yeah. Maybe this can replace some of their functions. But I think we could talk all night, Steve. I really appreciate you sharing your views. I hope you read the Bitcoin white paper at some point in the future as well. How can people follow your work?
Patreon. These days I'm giving up on the university sector for the level of bureaucratisation and excessive government interference in it, which I'm happy to admit occurs.
Yeah.
So if you go to patreon.com/Prof Steve King, you can both follow my work. A lot of my posts are free, but also you can support me for as little as $1 a month.
I'll put it all in the description below, mate. So I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future. I love picking your brain, so thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It was good fun.
Cool.